Before we tackle this black beast, let's explain a little something called world building. As put by TV Tropes, world building is a process of constructing a fictional universe. Strictly speaking, anything that happens in that universe builds it, so world building is only used to describe the invention of fictional details for some reason other than the convenience of currently ongoing story, up to and including simply engaging in world building for its own sake. World building for its own sake, huh? A moniker that defines Blazblue better than it tries to define itself. See, a major problem with Blazblue is that there are a whole mix of words and concepts and plots revolving around a character's histories, weapons, and heck the reason for their existence. But when you have so many characters with so many story elements that intertwine with each other's plots, and add alternate universes and time travel in the mix, you are begging for trouble. You need to explain yourself well and in a natural fashion in this kind of story, and Blazblue does neither. As for explaining itself well, unfortunately, those snippets of information I mentioned are thrown around haphazardly in an attempt to make the plot sound smart. Many characters in the story are either genius scientists or beings of supernatural intelligence or aid, so either they are aware of, or were part of, the complicated mechanizations of each other's plots as well as their own. So metaphysical concepts are brought up regularly, and if you're smart enough, you can kinda figure some stuff out. Hear that? If you're smart enough, you can kinda figure some stuff out. And that's bad. What's worse is when they mix their own newly created words and concepts into the mix. Here's this excerpt from Hakumen's story in the first game.
The corporeal establishment process has reached completion, thanks to the causality phenomena weapon embedded within your metallic frame.
Phenomena? I don't have such a thing inside me.
Then you have not been properly informed. Evaluating my quantum superposition and manifesting me in this world of the present with your causality phenomena device. That is almost certainly what the Grimalkin has intended.
What?
You are nothing but the I. The observer who has collapsed to the wave function of my prison is the one who holds your chain.
An observer with their own will? No, that can't be. That would mean that...
Yes, quantum superpositional manipulation. A technique that can grant one the power of a god, if only for a moment. But it is not perfected.
Spoiler warning, they never reveal any of what this means truly. You can just figure out that it's teleportation. That's all its purpose serves right now, and that's all it needs to be. Teleportation. Now there's a possibility that this kind of teleportation will be important for later. If so, how are you supposed to know that? There's no indication at all that it matters, or how it works, or how special it is from normal teleportation. Which brings me to natural explanation. Natural in this context basically entails characters talking in a manner which you count as normal in conversation. Something that is going to be explained between two characters usually isn't supposed to be done by outlining certain concepts like you're reading from an encyclopedia or command prompt, unless the character in question is teaching another, or is a robot or something. Oh, we'll get to the Murakumos later. The problem here is that in different ways, Blazblue both tries too hard to make it natural and fails at making it natural. Let's take it one after the other. Remember when I said that many of the characters here are geniuses and have a huge wealth of experience? That means that when they talk about deep concepts and do critical analysis of the events transpiring around them, they don't usually explain anything to each other, because they know the other characters should know. To them, this is a normal conversation. However, just because it works in character doesn't mean it's a good idea to write it that way. Remember that you're portraying things to an audience. You're going to have to give meaning to these things, or else they'll come out to us as nonsense. Heck, 80% of what Arakune says is nonsense. I mean, sure, it's based off metaphors for his mental state and his connection to the power of the Azure boundary or whatever, but the way it's presented is either useless or not explained well, and you can't discern what might be important or not. I know it's a fighting game, and other than talking in dialogue cutscenes, you don't have many avenues to explain things, Teach Me Miss Lychee episodes notwithstanding, but you still should try harder to... Wait a minute. Actually, that brings up a fantastic point. To even understand the very basic concepts like the organizations characters are a part of, you're probably going to have to do a lot of critical thinking, a lot of very extra reading, or watch the Teach Me Miss Lychee episodes they provide for you in some games. And while they're quite charming, it's the fact that you need these things to even understand the nature of the world these characters live in. That makes it bad. Because of how these genius characters talk to each other, One of the only ways you can process story elements is literally in a classroom taking on the role of a dumb student. Think about it. Now for when it fails at being natural, may I introduce to you the pivotal examples of my point, the Murakumo units. Their creation is a central part of the overall story, but you know so little about them for so long. It doesn't function well as a, ooh, how mysterious kind of plot point. Why? Because their nature and stories are alluded to multiple times by other characters in different ways that don't go anywhere, or at least not until way later. The writers, I assume, were trying to do a thing where they give you random vague clues to piece things together as you go, except that more often than not, it's more so that after reading everything in a later installment where they finally explain things more, or just looking at the wiki, you find out why characters talk to them like they did, or took certain actions toward them, which still isn't inherently bad. It's just how it's done in the previous games doesn't give me enough understanding and investment early on to care about the huge amount of information I was still missing, so I can look forward to its explanation in the sequels. And if someone were to pick up any of the sequels as their introduction to the series, then may the Lord have mercy on their souls, because they will understand nothing in that game's story just by playing. It's dubbed Continuity Lockout by some. Speaking of Continuity Lockout, let's not forget that in the last two games, side materials are all but mandatory to be read to understand any of the new elements being introduced into the plot at this point. You may joke about Kingdom Hearts' plot requiring you to have multiple consoles to play all their games to understand their story, at least in the past, but at least they were all games. You need drama CDs and light novels to fully understand what's going on in Blazblue by the end. Absolutely ridiculous. You don't explain things like this. You don't have a... Let's move on. Let's talk about how this affects the characters. Look, I enjoy Blazblue's characters and character dynamics a lot. They're so strong that they're what kept me looking through the series as I went. But thanks to this type of writing, I gravitate more toward the simple characters like Taukaka or Makoto, which brings me to a certain study of how characters factor into the plot as a result of the writing. Tao here is a complete imbecile with a terrible attention span, but she has motivations and connections that are very well defined. We know she's a clone of Jubei, a superpowered anthropomorphic cat. She fights as a vigilante to get money and food for her clan. She's a student / friend of Lychee's, and she's as dumb as bricks. There's not much more to Tao, and as such, she usually doesn't factor into this uber sophisticated plot much. But she does have a presence and an impact, especially in the later story. She's the only one for a long time that the main character Ragna can truly enjoy hanging out with and call a friend. She's one of Lychee's chains of morality when she starts going down a darker path. She's one of the few people that rejects the God of Death's offer to remake the world into one of indulgence by killing one of her friends, it's complicated, because she likes the world the way it is, and resolves to work hard to make it better on her own with her pure conscience. She's important in her own way, but only in her own way. Barely any of her actions directly alter a plot in a major way. Makoto is a much better example of a good character relative to writing. She factors into major plots more and more as a spanner in the works, and acts as a morality chain to multiple characters she went to high school with. She's involved with two major organizations, acting as a double agent for one, and is somebody who keeps getting in the main antagonist's way one way or another. But even with all that, she doesn't go on and on about the intricacies of her work, nor does she prattle on about philosophical concepts. It's not that she doesn't get it, it's that it doesn't need to be part of the conversation, so it's not. We get a bit of extra stuff about how people were prejudiced against her because she's a beastskin, half human, half animal. But instead of it being a throwaway thing to develop societal study conversations, it ties into her character and is part of her driving force. That's how you do it. Now, I could get into other characters individually when it comes to not explaining things right, but I think it's best if I focus on a character who suffers as a result of everyone else acting this way in the story. Let's talk about the use of writing for the main character, Ragna. Ragna, you poor man. Let me get something out of the way here firstly. Ragna is not dumb. Headstrong, stubborn, abrasive? Yes. But an idiot he is not. Heck, he even gets character development in later games to quell a few of those negative aspects I just mentioned. But man, does everyone treat him like a fool. Always giving him half-truths, metaphors, vague allusions, and ill-explained concepts. So much so that if he's not talking about how someone is pissing him off, his dialogue consists of, "What are you talking about? Are you going to explain? What is that supposed to mean?" And many, many variations thereof. And around 80% of the time, the other characters speaking to him usually never fully explain what they're talking about, and usually switch subjects after deciding for themselves that Ragnar is incapable of understanding them, or they just ignore his questions completely and prattle on about their own concepts. The poor guy suffers so much verbal abuse.
You're dumb too, and ignorant of everything around you. You lack intelligence, or class, or the slightest bit of gravitas. Your memory has all the retaining power of a sieve. You are pathetic, down to your very cells, and you don't even know it.
Really just abuse in general. Even when he gets his own harem through means not of his doing, it doesn't end well. But back on topic, it's almost like Ragnar is the audience surrogate based off of how information is presented to him. And when the audience surrogate is being told that he's incapable of understanding the full concepts of what the characters are talking about as they are presented, then you have a problem. Now, I've done some research, and apparently the reason why things are like this is because Blazblue was supposed to be a JRPG instead of a fighting game. And while I adore the fighting, I feel like if they stuck to that, it most definitely would have saved the story. Somebody suggested to me that maybe it could have been something like Persona, and then they make a Persona 4 Arena in their normal fighting game style. But that's what could have been. This is about what's here now. And furthermore, nowhere is this terrible explanation of information even more apparent than in the anime. They got 12 episodes to try and explain Calamity Trigger and Continuum Shift. What I was thinking is that they'd only do Calamity Trigger and save Continuum Shift until like a second season or something. But no, they decided to quash Calamity Trigger into 3 episodes and put Continuum Shift into the rest of the episodes, while still somehow having time for a Hot Springs episode. It just doesn't work. Characters still talk the same way that they do in the games, except there's no actual extra material here that a fan could just go and watch, or go and read, or go and play through, other than just playing the games themselves, in which case, why do you need the anime? There's barely any fighting in it. Seriously, it's a fighting game anime, and they go all like, we need to undo the curse on fighting game animes, and there's barely any actual good fighting in it. The rest of the characters just talking and talking about concepts that, if you're just getting into the anime, you will never understand. It was such a disappointment. Characters literally just show up randomly, state their purpose, never show up again, and they don't factor into anything. Arakune shows up in like episode 8 or something, then gets beaten up and just falls away. You have barely any idea what's going on with this guy. Why does this guy exist? Nope, he just came and just tried to do something and he left. Why is he important? Why is he in the opening song if he's just going to appear once or twice and just barely do anything, like so many other characters? The only thing that I'd say that the anime did well, better than the games, is giving Lambda some more character development screen time, because I swear that switch in Continuum Shift came really quickly to me. I need to make one thing very clear. Despite all this, I still adore Blazblue. The characters, the normal conversations, the comedy, good lord the comedy. Now that is perfection. And heck, the overall story as far as I understand is a really good story in terms of themes and goals and development. It's just that it's filled with a whole bunch of arbitrary stuff, terrible explanations, and horrible world-building moments. Even so, if I were to pick, I'd say that Continuum Shift does the best job of explaining its story. Sure, it's still in a somewhat roundabout manner, but it's honestly better than what I've seen otherwise. All in all, I love Blazblue, but I can never recommend it to anyone unless they're planning on skipping every bit of story-based dialogue and just get to the great fighting and certain events with funny character dynamics. It's sad, but true. But thank God for the people at the wiki for detailing certain things out. I'd only be a little less lost than normal players without it. Anyways, thanks for watching, and expect more Critical Hit videos to come out periodically. I'll try and see if I can at least make a schedule for these things, the operative word being try. But it's definitely something I'm continuing, so don't worry about it.